try not to trip over that, which I almost did walking over here because I'm a walker, so I'm walking back and forth. RTI squared, Jill asked me at the beginning, she said, do you call it RTII or do you call it RTI squared? She mentioned that I was actually on the council, the RTI council for the state when we came up with the plan, and that was one of the first things that came out of one of those planning meetings all the way back in February when we started working on this. And the way that came about was we were looking at different states, and you know how teachers do, steal something from here, flatter someone by using some of their work, that's what we call it, instead of calling it stealing it. And we were looking at different plans from different states, and we thought, you know, for Tennessee, I think one of our main focuses when we start looking at response to intervention needs to be Tier 1 instruction. I think across the state we realized that reading instruction in the Tier 1 area might not be as strong as we wanted it to be. So we decided to actually put the instruction piece first. So we have in the state of Tennessee what's called a response to instruction and intervention in the framework for that. And we decided after we played around with the RTII, someone said, hey, let's make it RTI squared. And that's the way the RTI squared piece came about. When we first did the first draft, if you have copies in your building that still say RTI Initiative 2013, that was the first draft that came out. If you have any of those still lying around your schools, you may want to get rid of those so that you're not confused. A few things changed, not a lot, but a few things did change in those final drafts. So the RTI framework, lots of things come to mind of what it is. But before we look at what RTI squared is, I want us to take just a few minutes to think about what it's not. I've heard lots of people saying, well, it's a special ed initiative. It's not, in fact, a special ed initiative. It is a general ed initiative. It came from work in coordination with special pops, but the curriculum and instruction was the actual division that started the work on the RTI squared. So it is a general ed initiative. It's not just for students with disabilities, it's for all students. It's for your lowest learners up to your gifted students. It's designed, and that's one thing that I really like about it, is it actually will touch every student. It's not just about reading, it's about reading and math. Those are the two areas that RTI squared covers. And it is the new way to identify students for SLD. The discrepancy model is going on its way out for K-5 beginning this year. RTI will be the way to identify students for SLD for this school year, and also for those coming up for reevaluation also. It's not a conspiracy to get rid of special ed. I've heard people saying, oh, this is going to take special ed, the place of special ed. No, it's really not. It's also not just a short term. I've heard people say, you know, we're not going to worry about that RTI right now because, you know, it'll probably be like everything else. It's probably going to go away after a little while. But really and truly, RTI squared is truly what's best for kids. And because of that, I feel confident that it's going to be around. It's a process. It's not just a one-time deal, and I think it's going to be beneficial to the state of Tennessee for many years to come. That last bullet says it is not a way to fix schools with weak core instruction, and we're going to look at how important that core instruction, that Tier 1 instruction, has to be strong for RTI to work in your school. So then what is RTI? Well, it's a process. It's a process for delivering the best means of instruction in reading and math that we can come up with. It's multi-tiered, it's layered, the 3 tiers. It also is all based on data. It's based on what's best for the kids according to the data. We no longer have time to guess and hope that things might work. Okay? Okay, so we look at the data, we find where the specific skill deficits are, and then we approach intervention from that direction. It integrates the entitlement programs and the general ed programs together, kind of meshing those two pieces. It is, like I said, going to replace the discrepancy model for identifying SLD students. And the primary goal is actually improving those academic outcomes for all students and also closing those gaps. So today when I'm talking, I want you to feel very comfortable. If you have questions, just go ahead and throw those out there. I like to have time at the end, but with just an hour session, no joke, I can talk easily on this for 3 hours. So I'm going to try to cram it all into an hour, so I'm probably going to be clicking it off pretty quick, but if you have questions, if you'll just let me know, or if you need me to slow down and go back to some part, let me know that. So the RTI squared model, as I said, includes 3 tiers. Tier 1 instruction is that core instruction. Tier 1 instruction is always at grade level. Always at grade level. When we were discussing the graphic here, the upside down triangle and the inverted triangle and the different pieces here, and we came up with this slide, which has been used probably more than most of the rest of the pieces of RTI to explain it. We had some conversation about what went here on these slides. So for Tier 1, where you see all, that means all students are involved. Every single child in 4th grade is involved in Tier 1 instruction. That's your ELL kids, it's your special ed kids, it's all students are involved in that Tier 1 instruction. I've had people ask then, if it's all, why does it say 80 to 85% out beside it? That 80 to 85% represents how research shows approximately 80 to 85% of your students. If you have a really strong Tier 1 instruction, if it's explicit, systematic, it's doing all the things we know it should do, then you should be reaching 80 to 85% of your students at mastery on the grade level skills that you're presenting. Tier 2, we have some students involved in Tier 2, and we'll talk about these individual tiers more in a moment. And about 10 to 15% of our students are probably going to need that Tier 2 instruction. Even if we have really strong, really solid Tier 1 instruction, there's still going to be 10 to 15% of those kids who are going to need a little more instruction to get them up to mastery. And then Tier 3, we actually have very few students. Once we get a really strong Tier 1, and we get the Tier 2 going strong, there should only be about 3 to 5% of our students who will need Tier 3 instruction. I spoke earlier and I said we have to find the student-specific skill deficits. So these are the 6 different areas of deficit that are included with the RTI. We have basic reading skills, reading comprehension, reading fluency, written expression, math calculation, and math reasoning. Those are the 6 different areas of deficit that can be identified. So all 3 tiers have certain things in common. So these are some of the things that you'll see at every single tier, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. For all 3 tiers, you need a school team and a district team. You also need a universal screener to use with those students. You have assessments, the ongoing ones, but also those progress monitoring. That's how we're going to track those kids, see if they're making improvements, see if they're moving in the direction we want them to move. And then for all the different tiers, you have recommended instructional times included. You're going to have fidelity monitoring that has to be in place, because we can have the most fabulous idea on paper, but if it's not happening in the classrooms, and if we're not checking to make sure that it's happening in the classrooms, then it's not going to go the way we want it to. So fidelity monitoring is going to be an important piece in all 3 of the tiers. Of course, parent involvement, we've got to keep those parents, we have to keep them informed of what's going on with their child, whether they're in Tier 1, moving back and forth, because the RTI process is very fluid. So students may be in Tier 2. If they're not making progress, they may move to Tier 3. If they make progress and they're coming up, their benchmarks are coming up, they may be moved back to Tier 2. So it's very fluid, and they should be changing in and out of these different groups regularly. So we want the parents to know, so that there aren't questions of, wait, I thought my child was here and now they're there, I don't understand. So we definitely need to have very strong parent involvement with all 3 tiers. And of course, professional development, which is what we're doing right now. So we're going to look at each tier. This is the decision tree, and it's actually included in the RTI framework. And if you need a copy of that RTI framework this summer while you're at home and yours is at school and they're waxing the floor so you can't get to it, you can always go to the 10-course site. If you go to the 10-course site, you can pull up the framework, you can pull up the implementation guides, you can pull up lots and lots of cool things about RTI. But this is the decision tree that's included in the RTI framework. So, thinking about Tier 1, I've already said that one of the main things to keep in our mind is Tier 1 is all students. All students. That's a little different from the past. One of the things that Tennessee realizes is over the past years, we have a lot of times pulled special ed students out of our core instruction and said, you know, they're not really understanding this 4th grade material, so we're going to take them over here to this room and we're going to work on some 2nd grade material, which is a good idea. We want to meet that child where they are. However, what happens? Do they ever catch up? Yeah, they never catch up. They're always behind because while they're doing 2nd grade stuff, 4th graders are going on and they're never going to make that. We're never going to close that gap. These students will never reach that. So the thought when we were putting this framework together was to end that cycle. The only way to end that cycle is if those students are involved in grade level work. Then at another time in the day, and we'll look at those in a minute, Tier 2 and Tier 3, then we'll do those, meet them at their need. We'll do that over here, and they'll be getting grade level standards too. We all know as teachers that sometimes students who may be qualifying for special ed, they may not get every single thing that we're teaching at a grade level standard. However, we also realize a lot of times students that are struggling in reading, the problem is the decoding piece. Anything that we say orally to a majority of these students, they catch it just like this. My oldest daughter has some strong dyslexic tendencies. She always, especially in grade school, had trouble with the decoding and with that part. However, she was a very, very sharp child. Anything that you said to her verbally, she had it in an instant. So I guess that's one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about this piece is that, you know, these students that we say, well, they can't read at grade level, so we're not gonna worry about grade level skills right now. Most of those, especially the comprehension skills, those students can absorb and can master, which means when they get their decoding skills up that we're working over here in intervention on, when they get that piece, they're ready to shoot and go. So that's where we're at here. The ongoing assessment. So in Tier 1, at the beginning of the year and 3 times a year, students are given a benchmark assessment, a universal screener. The universal screener should be nationally normed, and it should be skill-based. Those are the 2 pieces in the RTI framework that it asks for. Yes, ma'am.
Is state norm revised with those screeners?
With the screeners themselves, the districts will be allowed to choose which screeners they.
So the state's not going to come up with.
The state's not going to give just one and say this is the screener we're going to use. They are working on a list that's due to come out in July, a list of screeners that would be a suggested list. That would be the only screeners that they're ones that have passed a very rigorous rubric in making sure that they had all the pieces, the progress monitoring pieces and all the pieces there for us. But to your answer, the answer to your question is no, they won't be. So, students in kindergarten through 8th grade will be given a universal screener. The universal screener, the scores from those, since they're nationally normed, we can look at those scores and divide our groups according to their needs. So if a student does not meet grade level expectations, and if they are 1.5 to 2, or if they don't meet them and they're in the bottom 10th percentile, or if they're 1.5 to 2 years behind, they would qualify for Tier 3 instruction. If they don't meet them and they are in the 25th percentile to the 10th percentile, then they would qualify for Tier 2 instruction. We're going to look at both of those in just a minute. We're also going to look at how students who do really well, where do those fit into these different tiers, and how can we also address the needs of those students. So Tier 1 instruction, 80 to 85% will respond. Here are your recommended instructional times, and they're different according to grade levels. And so I'm so bad with numbers. Reading is definitely my thing. So usually I have to keep these on a little card in the back of my name tag whenever I go in buildings, because I still can't remember all the different numbers. But the numbers are differentiated across the different grade levels. The benchmarks, the point there is to collect those data points. The data points are collected from those progress monitoring assessments, and then the guided instruction, teach, assess, monitor, and adjust, of course. The fidelity monitoring for Tier 1 typically looks very much like the usual team rubric. So what you would normally go into a first grade classroom, and the way you would monitor that teacher with the team rubric, that's pretty much what's going to count for the fidelity monitoring piece in Tier 1, because obviously that's when they're doing their normal reading instruction time. So team rubric would be used there. The universal screener, again, for K-8, it's required, but it's recommended for 9 through 12. And if the students fall below the 25th percentile, they'll go to Tier 2. Before we look at Tier 2, I think there's been one of the things that I keep finding across the state when I go to work in districts or at trainings, whenever I'm working with trainers across the state, one of the things that I think can be very confusing to teachers is that you have students who are doing this reteach and remediation piece, and they're confusing that with the intervention piece. So reteaching and remediation, we can think of that as when you're teaching the standards, when you're looking at standards, with the Common Core, when the students just don't get it and we have to go back and we have to reteach that. So the reteach and remediation across the state, we've done pretty well with that for the last many, many years, especially with TCAP coming, and we find out we have different screeners that tell us this standard they're really weak on, so we go back and we reteach those. The piece that's embedded in the RTI is the intervention piece. And the intervention piece is different from the reteach and remediation piece. The way it's different is when we're intervening at the student's level. Okay? Intervention is based on specific skill deficit for a child. It's in Tier 2, Tier 3, and it's also in special education intervention. The goal there is to work on a specific skill, whether it's a skill skill that is a second grade skill necessarily, maybe not. So this is very important in Tier 1, and this is what we work on when we have, let's say we're a second grade teacher and we have a 90-minute reading block. So we give a whole group instruction on a standard. Then as the students are in different groups, the teacher brings a group back and we differentiate the instruction, right? But we're still working on a grade level standard in Tier 1. Now at a later time in the day, if that student's in Tier 2, they may be in a 30-minute session later on in the day where we may look at specific skill deficits. In other words, they're still having problems with the 6-syllable types. We would sit down, work on that specifically according to their needs. So here, the assessments would be your benchmark, your summative, formatives, and skill-based assessments. Those would be your actual skill-based, those universal screeners that I referred to a moment ago. Progress monitoring would be another way we would address those, and then formative assessments. So just trying to keep our mind kind of separated. We have reteaching over here, intervention going on at another time. So in Tier 2, we address the needs of the students. Of course, we want additional time, and that has to be beyond that core instruction. So we have 90 minutes that everyone's involved in for second grade. Then at a different time, we're going to have an additional 30 minutes for our Tier 2 students. I've had people say, oh, that's what I do when I do my group work in my core instruction. But when you're doing the group work in core instruction, that should be differentiated on state standards. When we do intervention, it's going to be based on their skill deficit needs. So those are going to differ there. Provided by highly trained personnel. Let me address that for a second because I've had lots and lots of questions in my region on, so who is a highly trained personnel person? So we had a lot of conversation around this when we were working on the framework. Who should be allowed to do this instruction, Tier 2 and Tier 3 instruction? If you say, definitely for our kids in intervention, we want our highest, most highly trained, our best teachers to do that. However, sometimes, if our triangle is not quite in that inverted stage yet, I don't know if anyone right now has triangles that are kind of flipped the other way. I know there are places in my region where they say, yeah, our triangle looks more like a rectangle right now. I'm not sure it's going where it needs to go. And that first year, that's pretty common. As a matter of fact, the first couple of years, that's pretty common. But when we have that, that means we have lots and lots of students who need some Tier 2 instruction. A lot of times Tier 2 is where we have that really large number of students those first few years. So thinking about that and thinking we don't want to say, okay, we're just going to have to change our numbers and not be able to meet with as many students. Instead, we said we may need to pull some EAs, some social studies teachers, some different people into the Tier 2 instruction time. So to do that, we need them to be highly trained personnel. I can remember walking into classrooms and an EA walk in and the teacher say, here's your material for today. Good luck with that. And they go over and they sit down with their group and the EA's thinking, okay, and they're flipping through it frantically trying to find out what it is they're supposed to be doing. So highly trained really just means someone, either at the district level or even at the school level, someone who is very well trained on the program that you're going to be using needs to sit down with that person. It doesn't mean they have to go to Oregon and be trained for 2 weeks' time up there or whatever. It's not saying that at all. It's saying that someone who knows the program and knows the program well enough to explain it to this person can sit down and walk them through it so that when they walk into the classroom and you hand them that, they know what's expected and they know how to work with those students. These are some things for Tier 2 instruction. Of course, we talked about it's 30 minutes. It must be a high quality research-based intervention and specific area of deficit. So the specific area of deficit, we know that the universal screener is going to tell us some about that. However, the RTI framework also talks about the survey level assessments, which would follow once you give the universal screener to everybody, and universal means everybody in the universe, right? Every fourth grader takes the universal screener. And then we say, okay, now we have a roster. These are all the students that are at grade level. They're doing fantastic. We're fine with them. Now we have tier 2 and tier 3 kids down here. And probably we're going to need to drill down further to find a true specific skill deficit for those students. So with a survey level assessment, it could be, there's a phonics assessment. If you need that in your district, there's one free from the state. It's on the TNCOR site. You can get on there, you can print those out and use those. There's also a phonological awareness screener. You can pull that off and use that diagnostic with your students. So those are two. The state is also working on getting some math. Pretty much the reading, most of the pieces you need for that is pretty well in place. The math, Ryan Mathis has actually been hired as the state reading interventionist. He was hired by Special Populations, and he has worked really hard to get some things in the works, which will hopefully be out soon as far as the math survey level assessments. So drilling down, finding the specific area of deficit, and then again, 10 to 15% are what we're thinking once the tier 1 gets up and strong. Tier 2 is 30 minutes of daily instruction. Does that mean Monday through Thursday? No, that means Monday through Friday. So if you have in your building where you say, well, but on Fridays we do Fun Fridays and we don't really do that, that probably needs to change, because if they're already in the 25th percentile and below, they're going to need intervention every single day. They're going to need that instruction. Again, the universal screeners can be used with those, and we've already talked about the survey level assessments. Progress monitoring, there's a little leeway there. You can progress monitor your students in tier 2 every week, or you can progress monitor them every other week. You're collecting those data points, retaining those in case the instruction proves not to help that child. Then eventually you'll have those data points if you need to make a referral for SLB down the road. It's also to help you, those progress monitorings also help you find patterns. They help you to find out what's working for a student or what's not working for a student. And it's to help us actually track those individuals as they move through the different tiers. In tier 2, we have fidelity monitoring, and there are actual sections if you're curious about what those look like. Basically, it's 3 times a marking period, with at least 2 of those being direct observation. The other one can be a review of lesson plans and a review of data, those type of things. Rate of improvement is important here. We have to know that the student is improving in accordance to what other peers are improving. So we want to make sure that they are showing improvement using the intervention that we have in place. And again, these are taught by highly trained personnel.
Can I ask you a question on
Sure.
fidelity monitoring?
Yes, sir.
We've established a team. Do they do the observations, or is that an observation as a principal that I would do, like a full 1 observation? You understand what I'm saying?
You're asking, do you have to be the person as the
Correct.
principal? No, you do not. As a matter of fact, there's a list in the RTI framework that'll say these are suggestions.
Okay.
A lot of times your guidance counselor, who would be some other people that might do
Or
that.
we're doing
Your
grade
vice
level,
principal,
a person
yeah.
who's grade level, and then my assistant principal is on that.
Absolutely. If you have an academic coach in the building, those people, and again, that's a school level decision, and sometimes it's a district level. Sometimes the district will say, we prefer that you use these people. But for the most part, it's usually left up to the school, to the actual
So
school.
it really isn't part of the team evaluation?
No, this is totally, yeah. And what I had said earlier, and I didn't mean to be confusing, I said that for tier 1, the team evaluation can count for both, yeah. Instead of having to do another one for the tier 1, if you do a tier 1 in reading, it can count for the fidelity piece in tier 1 as well as your team piece for that teacher. Yes, ma'am.
Has the state released the list of vendors for either screeners or progress monitoring?
That was what I said a moment ago. They are working on that, and it has gone a little slower than what we would like for it to have gone. But the list they are thinking now should be out in July. That's when they're telling us that date. And it will be for screeners. It'll be for universal screeners. They had talked at one time about eventually doing one for interventions, but they're still working on the screener piece right now, trying to get that through all of the offices and the approval and all. So tier 3 instruction. We've talked about tier 2. We've talked about tier 1. And for tier 3 instruction, these are students that either they're in that 10th percentile or below, or they may be students who are 1.5 to 2 grade levels behind. So if they're that far behind, you can go ahead and put them straight into tier 3. You still, basically the pieces of tier 2 still apply, only now it needs to be more explicit, more intensive than even in tier 2. And again, intervention by highly trained personnel. Remember too, with your most needy students, you want to have your most highly trained or your best teachers working with those that need them the most, I guess is the way to look at it. So keep that in mind when you're scheduling those things. So if you're one of those teachers and your principal says, yeah, I'm going to need you to teach some tier 3 instruction, instead of you going, oh no, that's so hard, you can say, oh great, he must think I'm pretty awesome if he's wanting me to teach tier 3. Yes, ma'am.
I noticed in the yellow it says consider possible need for special education. So after
if they do not, that's after tier 3.
in the time frame that when we start in the fall, and as a teacher, as an experienced professional, you immediately identify that this student may have some issues. What's the time frame for getting that kid the special education help they need using this model?
Now, you remember I said at the beginning, I gave a disclaimer that I'm terrible with numbers.
I'm sorry.
I said, you remember at first I said I'm terrible with numbers, that was my disclaimer, and honestly, you've caught me. It depends on, there's two things. If you accumulate data points every other week, then I can look, if you remind me at the end, I've got the manual over here. I think is it 12?
I'm sorry.
It could be at
No,
9 first, I thought, but it's moved back to 12.
Intervention will be going till part of Christmas time.
Yeah, and I'll check that again. That was,
So they lost an entire year, basically.
that was one of the things that did change from the initiative to the framework, and that's the other reason that I always like, was that before we changed it, or was it after we changed it? But if you remind me at the end, I'll look for that.
Can I ask
and
you a
give you
question?
a number.
Doing real well, and I appreciate that, just that you're giving me a pause to reflect on that. If we're gonna go inclusion this year, okay, I'm now pre-K, but of course, fourth grade. So we identify these children as special ed, but do they really change out of tier 3? I mean, or do they go to a special ed class like we've had in the past, which was self-contained?
Okay.
Now, we're using our special ed teachers in inclusion. I don't have it, too. So if they're in special ed,
What the RTI framework actually says, and we on purpose gave a little leeway here, what the RTI framework says is if students who have qualified for special ed will benefit from being in tier 3 instruction, then they may go to tier 3 instruction and should go. However, should there be a student who would not benefit from it, let's say you have a 4th grader who still doesn't know his letters, and the tier 3 instruction is all around diphthongs and digraphs and those type of things, and he still can't even recognize the letters, then obviously he might not benefit from that instruction. So sometimes there are, and if you do a walk to learn, that throws a whole new curve into it. You know, if you have multi-grade levels doing a tier 2 type intervention at the same time, then it could be that they could go to a different grade level, and lots of things come into play there.
Lots to learn.
Right, yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
And each school's gonna be different.
Exactly, it sure will. And it was intended that way. You know, we're not wanting to cookie cutter every building exactly the same, because no two buildings have the same students. And this truly is trying to look at what's best for those students. So, good point, thank you. For tier 3, most of the same. It still needs to be highly a high-quality, research-based intervention. I've had people ask me, so how do we know if it's a research-based intervention or not? There should be documentation. You know, for years and years, and I was one of these. I was a 2nd grade teacher for 12 years, and anything new that came out, I thought, oh, this is going to be the thing that's going to fix the kids, you know, and I would jump on and really want to get on those things. But really and truly across the state, time's up. We're out of time of trying everything and hoping that it might, maybe, possibly work. We're at the point where we've got to know that these interventions that we're going to put with these children are going to work, that they've been proven to work time after time after time. So if it's a research-based intervention, it should have been used and documented and proven time after time to work. And especially in tier 3, with these students who are already so far behind, we've got to know if we do this program and we do it with fidelity and we do it the way it should be done, then these students should begin to come up. Yes, ma'am.
I think, as a school psychologist, I think a big 4-letter word with teachers is research-based intervention. Is the state going to provide some research-based interventions for teachers? Because that's the biggest issue that I have right now is teachers don't know what are research-based interventions. And granted, they have school psychologists to kind of use as a reference. But in terms of fidelity, if they don't know the intervention, and then I say, hey, do this intervention, and they don't know it, I mean,
And that's the hope.
how can you assume fidelity if they don't even have a clue of how to implement that intervention, even though it's, research-based?
Right. And that's the reason that the fidelity monitoring comes into such an important play. And it's almost like a checks and balance kind of thing. True, you can have a fantastic program, but if someone has it sitting on the desk and it looks all nice, and every time someone walks in, they do the Vanna, you see I'm doing this program, and then they don't do that program with fidelity, then when you do your monitorings, that's the piece that should catch that. And that should be where, well, it can be a school psychologist. Like I said, there's a list of even suggested, and really and truly at your building level, I may say these people, and then you look at those people and you're like, yeah, not in our building, they're not. So, there's some leeway there on who can do those monitorings. It definitely can be the principal, it can be the assistant principal, guidance counselors, those type people are all on that list.
Is the state going to give us, as they were, the assessment piece, universal screeners, excuse me, some ideas of some products that would meet these standards?
That was
Suggested.
I would love to say, yes, we're going to do this, and actually we were very strong-willed, I guess you'd say, the original team, the RTI and Reading Council, because when we, did that first framework or the first initiative, we actually had attached to it the universal screeners that we felt went through the rubric and passed those pieces, and some intervention pieces too. However, there were some red flags when it went through, and they actually had to pull that away from the framework for the framework to go ahead and be passed through. So I understand, I completely, believe me, I was just in a district last year. I understand completely the need for that and the frustration of districts saying, why can't they just tell us? If they would just tell us. But there are lots and lots of legal issues surrounding that. I wish it weren't that way. And believe me, I get as frustrated, if not more frustrated, because this is what I do 24/7, no joke. I'm in districts every day, and then at night I'm teaching intervention, the reading intervention classes. So believe me, I understand the frustration. The last that I heard, curriculum instruction, said that they still would like to look at doing that. Once the universal screener, it's like, we've got to have a universal screener. We've really got to have this. They've been pushing that, and you can't push anything through. But they really have been trying hard to get that through this summer before the school year begins. So right now they're really pushing that, but they do still have hopes that they can do something with the intervention piece eventually.
What is the part about that it's going to be into effect, or RTI square being for pre-K through 4 this year, and then it goes 5th through 8th next year? I read something, what have I read about that?
There was a phase-in.
A phase-in, okay.
And that came about from the fact that, especially at the high school level, most grade schools have heard about this, have this in place to some degree in their buildings. So they weren't totally freaked out by it, I guess you could say. But now, when it came to high school and even some middle schools, they were like, you what? By July of 2014, you what? And so, just realizing too that there was such a gap, they were so much further behind than
The pre-K through 4, so they expedited it first, and then
the K through 5 will be, K5 will be this year, and then 6 through 8 will be next year, July of 2015.
So the numbers will be held accountable. Does it
Well,
mean that
all that really means is that the ones that aren't, the ones that have received the delay in implementation, will still continue to use the discrepancy models. So really that's basically what they're getting out of this. It doesn't mean they can just sit back and do nothing. They have to, and if for them to be approved for the phase-in, those buildings actually had to write a plan, and someone will be, checking on that plan throughout the year to make sure, like, they may have said, we've got this going, we've got a schedule, we've got the personnel, we don't have the funding for the interventions or whatever. And then they would have to give a plan of how they're going to do that, and as they work through that for the year. It's a good question. The Tier 3 instruction has to be more intense than the Tier 2, and it has to be 45 to 60 minutes of instruction daily in small groups. The universal screener, of course, plays into that, and survey level assessment again. So once we give the universal screener to all of our students, the students that we identify as Tier 2 and Tier 3, which these will be our Tier 3 students, would then be given that survey level assessment to find the specific skill deficit. And then once we have that specific skill deficit, we know what intervention we will want to put into place to take care of that deficit. Progress monitoring, again, this can be done every week, or it can be done every 2 weeks. Again, to collect the data points, to look for patterns, and to track the individual students. The fidelity monitoring does differ a little bit. Here it's a little, I guess you would say a little more. Again, like you were saying, for how do we know that what we've asked to happen is really happening. So 5 times a marking period, 3 direct observations. 2 of them must be a review of the implementation of the data, those actual data points. Again, the rate of improvement is an important factor. It has to be taught by highly trained personnel. So our goal with RTI Squared is that with these extra interventions, we're hoping that all of these students are just going to do wonderfully, and they're gonna, their academics are really gonna rise. However, we're not trying to keep students who truly need that special ed from getting that special ed. So students who are not responding, students after the data points have been collected and the students are not responding, then there comes a time we need to consider, should we go ahead and refer this child for special ed. So Tennessee SLD, there are 3 conditions. The first one being, or was one of these, was their underachievement in one of those basic deficits that I put up at the beginning of PowerPoint. The second condition is their insufficient response to the interventions we're putting in place. If so, the third condition is we have to look at these like hearing and vision, cultural factors, emotional disturbances. We have to look at their absentees. All of these have to be crossed off the list as being reasons for this being an underachievement. So those 3 conditions work with the specific learning disability.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Tier 3, there's always been a division between the gen ed students and what sped teachers could teach. In Tier 3, if we have gen ed kids that are on that level, can the sped teacher work with them in a combined group of sped kids?
As long as you keep the, not more, I think it's not more than 50-50. You don't want to have, 5 kids, well, you wouldn't have that many in a group anyway, but you want to keep the numbers towards at least at 50-50. So, but yes, absolutely, special ed teachers. And the thing there, once this really gets going in your building, what you'll find is all these kids, you're looking at kids in general, you're not even looking at are they special ed or are they not. What you're looking at are specific skill deficits. So if you have the 4 of you with the same specific skill deficits, you're going to be in a group regardless of whether you're special ed, not special ed, or what. And then it would just make sense then to use those special ed teachers in that mix. Because a lot of times, those special ed teachers, so the teachers that are best trained in these programs, exactly.
Because I came from a special ed background, and in your school, when you tried to do that, we were not allowed to do that. Sped was not allowed to teach gen ed. That's a good news.
And yes, I think so. And really and truly, the reason when we did the RTI framework, the reason for putting curriculum instruction and special pops right there together was to make sure that everybody was on the same page and that everybody felt the same and that all those pieces would work together. The instructionally appropriate IEPs, all of those things coming around. I was in those trainings last week, and it's all, in those you're looking at, for the SLD kids, you're looking at what is a specific skill deficit, and that's what you're working towards. So thank you for that question.
Question?
Yes.
I have another question. As a general music teacher and choir director, how does my program fit into this, as well as other fine arts and exploratory teachers?
Good question. Good question. So we were talking about Tier 2, and I definitely left out the whole scheduling piece today, and scheduling can be a booger. I know that was one of I hated to sit down every year and to work on that piece. But when you start looking at scheduling, you start looking at Tier 2 especially. If you do a Tier 2, like lots of times in middle schools and high schools especially, they'll do a Tier 2 all across the building, like from 10 to 10:30 each day. During that time, if you have a list of students from the universal screener, and you say, okay, these kids are benchmarked, they're fine. These Tier 2 and Tier 3, those are going to be your first pool. Okay, Tier 2 and Tier 3 always get first attention. So we put them over here, and we say, okay, Tier 2 and Tier 3, we give that the survey level assessment We give them by skill deficits, we divide them out. Give them the best reading and math teachers, and they're over here working. Now, at the same time, we have this whole slew of other kiddos that are just running around the school if you don't do something with them, right? So those students, the next pool usually is students who are having trouble with standards. So let's say the Algebra 2 teacher says, okay, I have all these kids, yeah, they've got the skills, they don't need to be in the intervention. They need to be in remediation, right? Standards remediation. We would pull those students out, and they go to the algebra teacher and the whoever, writing teacher, those type people. Then you still have lots and lots of kids left, right? So those are your high achieving kids. They can be put into all kinds of different groups, and really that's at a district and a building level.
So this is only one class period a day? This does not involve the entire day, as I was led to believe? That we were doing this in our classes? In all of our classes? And I'm like, I'm a choir director general, how am I going to implement this in my classroom?
Yeah, and it could, I mean, I'm not going to say that you definitely would not be expected to teach a Tier 2 intervention. It depends on the breakdown of
We
your building.
already have RTI in our building, and I've taught math, I've taught all of it, but I was told that RTI squared is something totally different, and this will involve an all-day, this involves what we do in our classrooms, which I'm scared to death.
And your district may be going from a position like that. Different, like you said, different districts and even different buildings in different districts are handling it differently. Some of them are taking a very aggressive approach to this, where they're saying everybody in the building is going to be involved because they have high numbers of Tier 2 and Tier 3. It all depends on the makeup in your building. If you don't have a huge number of Tier 2 and Tier 3, it may be that at that time you could have a show choir or a different, whatever different pieces in Tier 2 time. But I'm not going to, don't go back. Now, don't go back and tell your principal, Cynthia Ables said it was okay.
I don't want my observations to hinge on this in my classroom, because I'm not trained for that. Does that?
Yes, it does. It does. And I think that's a good point too. This year, it's been different. It's been a challenge for lots and lots of districts because it's new. It's totally new. And I think some people have taken it as, oh, this is going to be terrible, and not really understood completely. That's part of my job as the South Central Core Office. My job is RTI intervention. That's what I do every day, all day. I go into my 16 districts. I sit down with the district personnel, and I explain to the supervisors how this can work in different ways. So whoever's the RTI interventionist in your area can come and talk about different possibilities with that. So,
I have a question, please.
Okay.
Okay, going back to the Tier 3, and a couple springs ago, we had a daily instruction in small groups from 45 to 60 minutes. Is that with special ed? Is that in a special ed classroom, or is that part of this RTI where different teachers will be doing that?
That one slide was specific to Tier 3. Now, oftentimes, again, depending on how your special ed teachers work into the makeup, a lot of times the needs, and according to how your IEPs are written in your building, there's kind of a shift right now in the way lots of IEPs are being written so that it can be more accommodating for those students. To be grouped into different groups according to specific skill deficits. But the 45 to 60 minutes is particularly pointing to the Tier 3 instructions.
Right, but is that in,
Is that special ed?
yeah, is that special ed time?
Or is that a separate time from the special ed time?
It can be either. I'm not trying to not answer your question, but as I said before, when you have a student who has qualified for special ed, if they would benefit from Tier 3 instruction, they should be in that Tier 3 instruction. And according to how the IEP is written, sometimes that can be.
So they're not the same thing. Tier
Not
3
necessarily.
and special ed are not the same thing.
No, definitely. There are students who are pulled out for their special ed, according to their IEP, says they get so much time for this up here, but they may also be in a tier 3 instruction. So there's kind of an overlap there, and again, it depends on how the teachers are set up in that building. Does that make sense? Yes, sir.
One thing needs to be remembered, the state has left a lot of latitude for the LEAs to interpret this and implement it based on their individual needs too, as long as they follow the protocol and the framework alignment.
Right.
So what you're talking about being special ed, some LEAs may actually say that, yes, tier 3 is going to be put into special ed because of the significant needs. It just depends on each LEA's interpretation.
But am I understanding you correctly to say that you feel like it's better to have tier 1, 2, 3 and a pullout for those kids who are not able to hang with tier 3?
Typically, yes. Typically,
Okay.
tier 3, lots.
Adamantly against that, and all of the teachers are, we're not agreeing. We feel like it's important, and they don't do it.
Tier 3, and I've heard people say, so tier 3 is special ed. No, it's not. It's really not. There are lots of students who qualify for tier 3 who have not qualified for special ed. There are students in tier 3 who have qualified for it. And that's why I said it has to be fluid. You have to be able to move it in and out. Just looking at, if you keep in mind what's best for that child, I don't think you're going to get in trouble as long as you keep that in your mind. It's like you said, on purpose, we've given a lot of leeway, or the state has given a lot of leeway there, because no two districts are the same. You can't cookie cutter the RTI for every district. I really like this graphic because it reminds it, that's not good. Okay, sorry, I'm not technically inclined at all. The core instruction here, remember, everyone has core instruction plus one skill intervention, okay? So everybody has core instruction. They may have core instruction plus tier 2, they may have core instruction plus tier 3, or they may have core instruction plus special ed intervention, and that may kind of clarify for you. With all of these, though, you're still looking at one skill-specific intervention. And with that instructionally appropriate IEP now coming to the forefront, the same thing here. If you have a student who has been put into special ed for SLD, you're still looking at that one specific skill intervention for their instruction. This is another kind of generally the same. So special ed, we're going to get into this for just a minute and then our time's going to be up. Specific learning disability, it would be in addition to the core instruction. They are supposed to be in the core instruction. Core instruction does need to be provided by that general ed teacher. It has to be more intensive than tier 3. It has to be the most intensive. It does have to be directed at the specific skill deficit that's been identified for that student. It must be research-based intervention that's tied to that specific skill deficit. Again, a trained professional working with it, progress monitoring those students, making data-based determinations for those interventions then. This is the implementation guide. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. Going back to that one skill specific, a number of our students have multiple specific learning disabilities. So are they being pulled out into so are we focusing on one skill at a time?
Yes, ma'am.
And so what if they never get a chance to get?
That's, when you're looking at the instructionally appropriate IEPs, true, some students only have one specific deficit. Some students, I know in some of the case studies, the case study that I had, there were like a whole list of, And again, I think sometimes if you have a behavior skill and an academic skill, sometimes those things can go hand in hand. However, for the most part, in the academics, you want to address one skill at a time. Is that clear? Does that make sense? The implementation guide, when we were on the on the team, we made this, got the framework all written and ready to be sent through the offices for approval. And we looked at each other and we said, you know, it's going to be a lot of work for districts to get all just the paperwork in place. So Mia Hyde, I don't know if you know Mia, but she is the reading coordinator for the state. And she said, you know what we need to do is divide up into groups and everybody take a section. And everything that we can find that would be useful to districts so that they don't have to sit down and type all this out, you know, because I was on like the parent involvement one. So we took all the letters that we had in our different districts and we put them together and put them in what we call the implementation guide. And I've had people say, that RTI framework's like 400 pages long, how can we ever? And they're actually speaking more to the implementation guide because the framework is only 88 pages and the rest of it is the implementation guide. And the implementation guide is not anything you have to do. There is nothing in there that you have to do just like it's in the implementation guide. It's just there to give you some samples, some things to look at so that you don't have to start from scratch, because I don't know if you're like me, but whenever I say, okay, we need to write a letter to the parents telling them when they move from tier 1 to tier 2, just letting the parents know, and I'm sitting here going, okay, how am I going to start this? So there are lots and lots of materials in there. There's some scheduling samples, different scenarios to help you understand it. There's the letters and communications with parents, students entering a midterm, what to do with them. And there's also some guidance on ELL students. And basically, that's it. We did 3 months, so we did it right on time. Thank you so much for your questions. If you do have questions that I didn't clarify as well as you would like for me to, please send me an email and I will, if I can't answer it, I'll send it to Tammy or Ty1 and get them to answer it for me. Thank you.